A second summit with the North Korean dictator. We discuss the president's planned meeting this week. Why some within his own party disagree with the president's decision to declare a national emergency at the southern border. And the fight to protect a memorial cross heads to the Supreme Court. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation.
Well, it's Act 2 for President Trump and Kim Jong-un. Welcome to Faith Nation. I'm John Jessup.
And I'm Jenna Browder. Well, President Trump is in the air, headed to his second summit with North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un.
The commander-in-chief believes Kim will eventually make major concessions on nuclear weapons by building a better relationship between the two men. White House correspondent Ben Kennedy joins us from the White House with details. Ben, a lot of people are looking to see what comes out of this summit.
Yeah, John and Jenny, you're right. To be honest, President Trump says he thinks they will have a very good summit, adding that North Korea could become an economic powerhouse if only they would give up their nuclear weapons. President Trump took off for his second high-stakes meeting with North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un.
We're going to have, I think, a very interesting 2.5 days in Vietnam.
In Hanoi, the two plan to talk about new relations, lasting peace, complete denuclearization, and recovering POW MIA remains. North Korea has not fired a missile or even tested a nuclear weapon since their last meeting more than a year ago.
As long as there's no testing, we're happy.
Critics, however, want some commitment from North Korea to dismantle their nuclear program. U.S. intel officials say that's unlikely.
Leaders ultimately view nuclear weapons as critical to regime survival.
Kim left North Korea Saturday in an armored train. Trump believes that building trust will reduce tension in the region and could even lead to an end to the Korean War. Now, a ceasefire has been in effect since the 50s between North and South Korea. The summit is on Wednesday and Thursday. In the meantime, Trump says the sanctions will remain in place as North Korea has taken pretty much zero concrete steps to dismantle their nuclear program. John, Jenna?
White House correspondent Ben Kennedy. Thanks, Ben. Well, earlier today, I spoke with former CIA intelligence officer Bruce Klingner, now with the Heritage Foundation, who, ahead of the second meeting between Trump and Chairman Kim, expressed caution. Bruce, with respect to denuclearization and notwithstanding ballistic missiles, how much progress has been made since the Singapore summit in June?
Quite simply, there's been no progress in denuclearization. In fact, North Korea continues to nuclearize. As leaked intelligence reports and unclassified satellite imagery shows, is that they've also expanded or refined the production facilities for fissile material, reentry vehicles, missiles, and mobile missile launchers.
So what are you expecting to come out of this summit?
Well, first of all, we need a diplomatic Hippocratic oath of first do no harm. In the Singapore summit, the U.S. again agreed to a vague, poorly crafted agreement with North Korea that didn't even define what denuclearization was, let alone the requirements that North Korea had to go through. What we need to do is, really point out that it is North Korea, not the U.S. or South Korea or Japan, that's in defiance of 11 UN resolutions. Those resolutions not only require North Korea not to test nukes or missiles, they require North Korea to abandon their nuclear, missile, and biological and chemical warfare programs in a complete, verifiable, irreversible manner. So that's CVID. That's not the U.S. negotiating position. It's a UN requirement. So we need to have North Korea take the first steps to convince us that they've changed their behavior, that they're willing to come into compliance with what the international community has directed them to do. We shouldn't be offering up concessions, prematurely in order to induce them to do what they're required to do.
North Korea is notorious for its human rights abuses. What do you make of the fact that President Trump praises Kim Jong-un on Twitter?
We can have diplomatic engagement, even at the leader level, with countries that we don't trust, that we don't like, or that have aberrant human rights violations. It doesn't mean we have to praise the leader, in my view, extravagantly. This is a person who is committed, according to the UN Commission of Inquiry report, crimes against humanity. And when you look at the 400-page report by the UN, It's really, stomach churning what the regime is doing, forced abortions, et cetera. So when we have the president saying he is a courageous man, he's an honorable man, he loves his people, that really goes against what the regime is like, the true nature of the North Korean regime.
At any point in all the time that you've been examining this issue, does it look like we're any closer to solving the issue now?
Not really, and it's going to be harder to get them to give up a program that they've completed. So that's not to say we don't keep trying, but I think there's not a lot of optimism, but I think we can't just throw up our arms and surrender and say, well, okay, you're a nuclear power, we'll remove the sanctions, we'll remove the punishment. As long as the aberrant behavior continues, you have to maintain the pressure or the punishment. The mayor of a city doesn't say, well, there's still crime, so let's just disband the police department. No, you continue doing what you can.
Well, to South America, the Trump administration is ramping up pressure on Venezuela's Nicolas Maduro. Vice President Pence, while in neighboring Colombia today, announcing new sanctions aimed at loyalists of Maduro and calling on other nations to freeze assets of Venezuela's state oil company.
And so today, with great respect, the United States calls on all the nations gathered here to intensify efforts to deny the Maduro regime access to financing and take the following actions to isolate the Maduro dictatorship. First, we call on all Lima Group nations to immediately freeze the assets of PDVSA. Second, we urge you to transfer ownership of Venezuelan assets in your country from the Maduro's henchmen to President Guaido's government, and to do so immediately.
And Vice President Pence didn't rule out military action to force Maduro to step aside. Well, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo added all options are on the table when it comes to Maduro's removal, telling Fox News the steps being taken are for the good of the Venezuelan people.
But no military force.
We've said every option's on the table. We're going to do the things that need to be done to make sure that the Venezuelan people's voice, that democracy reigns, and that there's a brighter future for the people of Venezuela.
All right, let's.
The Trump administration announced today millions of dollars to aid Venezuela's neighbors to help those fleeing Venezuelan oppression. This after a deadly weekend in the region.
Tear gas and gunfire stopped a humanitarian convoy entering Venezuela. Multiple people were killed, hundreds wounded.
Now Maduro has sealed off the border with Colombia to prevent more aid from entering the country. Chuck Holton has a story from the Colombia-Venezuelan border.
Pandemonium over the weekend as the supporters of interim President Juan Guaido attempted to get truckloads of humanitarian aid into Venezuela from Colombia and Brazil. National Guard troops loyal to dictator Nicolas Maduro blocked bridges to stop the aid, which Maduro claims is part of a U.S.-led coup against him. Lester Toledo, a representative of Guaido's party, leads the effort to get across the border. Days earlier, he talked of success.
23 of February, in this bridge, you're going to be a witness of a humanitarian tsunami that will be around here, and we're coming into Venezuela with this humanitarian aid.
But things didn't go as planned. Saturday, thousands of desperate Venezuelans, led by Juan Guaido himself, tried to run the blockades and deliver 235 tons of American aid to their countrymen. By mid-afternoon, the effort fell apart as Venezuelan forces torched 4 aid trucks and fired tear gas at hungry protesters. Just across the border, criminal gangs loyal to Maduro looted stores and attacked those supporting the aid effort. As hopes for change went up in smoke, protesters expressed frustration with the Venezuelan troops standing against them.
We beg the National Guard to put themselves on the side of the Venezuelans. To think of your children, think of your families.
Here on the Colombian side of the border, you can see there's an incredible marketplace and lots of fruits and vegetables and everything for sale. In Venezuela, what we're being told is that there's absolutely nothing. So the question is, when is the military going to relent and stop supporting Maduro, because he won't allow any of the products to come into Venezuela? And I just spoke with the wife of a military officer who told me off camera that the Venezuelan military officers really don't support Maduro. The question is, who's going to be the first guy to stand up to a dictator?
Other Venezuelans told us though the aid hasn't yet made it, they're grateful for the American support.
I know that God is with us all the time, and we have to tell you thank you to the American people, because we need you really.
Chuck Holton, CBN News, Cucuta, Colombia.
Well, to the U.S.-Mexico border, the House is preparing to vote on a measure to block the president's decision to declare a national emergency to free up money for his border wall.
For more on that, we now turn to Capitol Hill correspondent Abigail Robertson. Abigail, that vote is set to take place tomorrow.
That's right, John. And since Democrats control the House, it is very likely it's going to pass the House tomorrow, with maybe a few Republicans voting with Democrats to block President Trump's national emergency declaration. And because this is called a privilege resolution, the Senate has to take it up within 18 days of the House vote. Otherwise, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell likely would never bring this to the Senate floor. Now, Republicans they feel pretty confident that even though there might be a handful of Republicans who vote with Democrats on this, since they still have a pretty substantial majority in the Senate, that they will ultimately have the votes to make sure that this bill fails in the Senate. And remember, even if it passed both the House and Senate, it would then go to President Trump's desk, where it is very unlikely he would sign a resolution that blocked his national emergency declaration.
Yeah, Abby, the vote comes as opposition to the president's declaration really does continue to grow.
Yes, that's right. Just this week, we heard that there's 58 former national security officials who signed a joint statement saying that they disagree with the president declaring a national emergency at the southern border in order to fund this border wall. And this is a bipartisan group of officials. There's names on it like Chuck Hagel, a Republican, former defense secretary, and former secretaries of state Madeleine Albright and John Kerry. So some notable names on this list.
Abby, we have a little less than a minute. I just want to address the fact that even some members of the president's own party aren't necessarily big fans of the emergency declaration.
That's right, John. Now, before President Trump officially declared this declaration, I spoke with quite a few Republican lawmakers who did not want to see this happen because they're worried about the precedent that it sets when a Democrat takes the White House and what they could declare a national emergency in order to get those funds for. But now we're seeing a lot of Republicans actually support the president on this now that he's done it, because they think it was one of his only options to get the money for the border wall. Right now in the Senate, only Republican Senator Susan Collins has announced plans to vote with the Democrats on this. And in the House, there's Congressman Justin Amash, who not only is going to vote with the Democrats, he's also co-sponsoring the bill that blocks President Trump's national emergency declaration. And then we've also seen about 24 former Republican lawmakers who are urging their Republican colleagues who are currently in office to vote to block the President Trump's declaration. So, but I think right now the Republicans who currently are here on the Hill are standing by the president, and we're going to see the strong majority of them support him on this.
Okay, Capitol Hill correspondent Abigail Robertson. Thanks, Abby.
Well, Chief Political Analyst David Brody joins us now for more. David, what do you make of all this opposition the president faces?
I tell you what, this is a problem for the president, and here's why. Because Abby said Susan Collins is the only Republican that will support it for now. 47 Democrats plus Susan Collins, 48. Right now, there are 9 other Republicans who don't want to vote for or who want to vote against the president. So my guess is when it comes to the Senate, we're looking at maybe 2, 3, 4 of them. If that's the case, then all you need is 50 in this case. And then all of a sudden you have a Republican Senate voting against this president. And here's the problem for the president on that. How do you convince in the court of law that this is a national emergency when you have both Congress, House, and a Republican Senate both saying it's not a national emergency? I think that's the problem. We have to watch the Senate vote tomorrow. That's why it's important.
Another issue that people are focusing on is the idea of precedent. Can you talk a little bit about precedents that it sets for future presidents as it relates to their policies that might not necessarily fit the policy of President Trump.
Yeah, so over there is a can of worms, and it just got opened up big time because this does open up a can of worms. Climate change could be a national emergency. You just go down the liberal far left hit list, and the Green Deal, I just go on and on. It all could be that. And so Abby was talking about that. So I think that's the big concern. And look, I mean, ultimately, what could happen here? We just don't know. That's the problem here. I think the problem ultimately becomes that this president is giving Republicans a choice. Back me, the president, and what I'm doing, or go with the Constitution. Many folks like Marco Rubio and others say, you know what, if you're going to make me choose between backing the president and backing the U.S. Constitution, got to go with the Constitution. I think that's where some folks like Rubio, Mike Lee, Rand Paul will side against the president here.
Yeah, that shows real division. David, come 2020, how do you think this plays out? What will be the effect there?
Yeah, well, I think this is the whole enchilada, no pun intended, I'm sorry, but immigration and everything. But no, I mean, I think this is the whole enchilada. What I mean by that is that this could secure a second term for the President of the United States. I think this could really do it because he's showing that he's fighting, not just because he didn't get the 5.37 or whatever it is, 5.475 billion, but also because he's going through the courts and challenging the courts. So think about it for a second. In 2020, along comes President Trump. He's fighting the far left, he's fighting the Democrats, he's fighting the socialists, he's fighting the courts. And all of a sudden, you've got to mobilize the base. And the key is mobilizing your base. It's all about energy, it's all about turnout. And if you're fighting on 4 or 5 different fronts, that bodes well for you in a 2020 presidential election.
All right, David, thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
Coming up, how the Catholic Church plans to tackle the sexual abuse crisis.
Pope Francis condemned pedophile priests at the conclusion of a global summit on sex abuse in the church. The Pope labeled predator priests tools of Satan. He also vowed to confront abusers with the wrath of God and make victims the priority. Abuse victims are calling for strong action, not just words.
Father Frank Pavone joins us now for more. Father Pavone, coming out of the summit, we heard the Pope say that the acts of the abuse the church has seen are criminal. Practically, how can the church end the abuse and also the cover-up of the abuse?
One of the things that I'm very much involved with, of course, is the effort to heal people who have been wounded. I'm very privileged to say that one of our pastoral team members here at Priests for Life, Dr. Theresa Burke, a psychologist, has founded something called Grief to Grace, and it operates worldwide to help victims of abuse to go through a process of spiritual and psychological healing. This is very much a big part of what has to happen because the church can't heal from this until all of the victims of abuse know that there is a path towards healing, an opportunity for them to say to the church, "You hurt me," and to be able to express their anger in a productive way, in a safe environment, together with people who understand their wounds and know how to lead them on a path to healing. So I would encourage people to learn about Grief to Grace and take advantage of it both on a personal level, on a diocesan level, and many dioceses are in fact doing this. That's part of the answer to this very, very big and very, very important question. As to what bishops will do, what policies will be in place, again, of course, that is a responsibility squarely on their shoulders. And I think it's everyone's hope that as a result of this recent meeting, we'll start to see some concrete plans of action.
So what's your message to those who may say there's a lot of talk but not enough action when it comes to addressing abuse?
Well, that would be a concern of all of us, we as priests included, and I know many bishops have said the same thing, that, you know, that the time for talking is past. Now, obviously, leaders have to come together and talk in order to come up with solutions, but there has to be a concrete action, and we're all in the same boat in regard to that. We can't move forward with an us versus them mentality, but rather with we as the church. Remember, the church is not just bishops and cardinals. The church is not just priests and deacons. The church is all of us together. And the more we see this as a matter that we all have to solve together, the better off we will be. So we are all in that same mode of saying, look, we want We want concrete steps taken, whether it is in terms of the training of the clergy. I know that's one big area where there have to be key steps in place to make sure that there is maturity, that there is virtue, that there is self-control, that there is accountability, not only on the part of priests, but also on the part of bishops. There have to be good reporting mechanisms. There has to be honesty and transparency. There has to be speed when something is suspected or known. There has to be a very rapid response, and one that respects the rights of everybody, by the way. Also, you know, as a priest, of course, I'm very sensitive to the fact that the rights of the priests need to be taken into account in these situations, and everybody in the process has to be treated fairly.
And finally, do you think this is a turning point for the Catholic Church?
The turning point of the Church always is that mode of repentance and reform. But yes, this is a moment when more than any ordinary moment in history is a real fork in the road. I mean, we really have to decide, are we going to treat each other as brothers and sisters where there's openness and honesty? The more we can let that attitude of transparency and accountability permeate the many different decisions that have to be made, then the healthier we will be as a church, and in my opinion, the quicker we will be towards the solutions that have to be made. So I think it's a turning point, and we shouldn't compartmentalize and just say, well, it's only in this area of clergy sexual abuse. Children are abused in many different ways, and many human beings are abused in many different ways. The Pope mentioned, for example, aborted children, which of course is my area of focus. That's a form of abuse. That's a form of child sacrifice, together with these other terrible crimes of abuse that have been revealed of late. So if the more comprehensive an approach we take to realize the damage that is being done, the more comprehensive approach we take to realize the accountability and transparency and honesty that's needed, yes, it will be a very good turning point for the Church.
Father Frank Pavone with Priests for Life, thanks for joining us.
Why a cross is at the center of a case being argued before the Supreme Court this week, when we come back.
Welcome back. The Supreme Court will hear a religious liberty case this Wednesday involving what's known as the Peace Cross, a World War I Veterans Memorial in Bladensburg, Maryland, near Washington, D.C.
While critics call it unconstitutional, defenders point out crosses marked most graves of those killed in the conflict. As Paul Strand reports, this case takes on a greater importance because of the court. If the court eventually decides this cross has to go, it could affect thousands of others.
Moms of 49 Bladensburg area soldiers killed in World War I designed the Peace Cross in memory of their sons. Here 100 years later, the legal team defending the cross, which is now on public land, believe this could be the most crucial religious liberty case the Supreme Court handles this term. It could put an end to judges and bureaucrats deciding if a religious symbol or display is too religious or secular enough.
This area of the law is just leading to absurd results. It's leading to city councilmen having to go out there with rulers to make sure that they have enough reindeer around a nativity scene to make sure that it is secular enough of a display.
Jeremy Dice's team hopes the court agrees if a symbol or display doesn't force people to accept religion, it isn't too religious.
A passive monument isn't forcing you to do anything. This monument in particular is just there to remember 49 men who died defending our freedom.
Maryland's governor took to Facebook to defend it.
This monument was never meant to be a religious object. It was to honor our veterans, which we're going to fight to protect.
But a team of atheists, humanists, and secularists object that the Peace Cross is on government land and maintained by the state.
That the government on this piece of property is favoring a religion with this huge symbol, that when you come across the bridge or approach it from any of the highways, you see nothing but this huge Christian cross.
Renee Green talked to Lowe and other opponents of the cross for her documentary, Save the Peace Cross.
It gives the impression of Christianity and nothing else, and it gives the impression of government endorsement of Christianity.
In the suit against the cross, one atheist said he was traumatized driving by it. Green appears in her documentary to point out that many telephone poles are in the shape of a cross.
If the plaintiffs win this lawsuit, will all the telephone poles need to be modified? I just hope that they are not traumatized by telephone poles while driving.
But all humor aside, this case has serious implications. Symbols like the Ten Commandments and Nativity have both won and lost in various courts. Now one of the world's most beloved symbols, the cross, is on the line.
The Supreme Court of the United States is the last best hope for this memorial.
Paul Strand, CBN News, reporting from Bladensburg, Maryland.
Yeah, it's a high-profile case that's getting a lot of national coverage.
Yeah, a lot of people will be paying attention to those oral arguments this week. Well, that's going to do it for tonight's Faith Nation.
Have a great evening.
I was very